Thank you for staying with us. This is Report Desk Africa on News Central Television. If you're just joining us, well, that's my name on the screen, Bernard Akede. We did mention at the beginning of the show that we will be taking you across the continent of Africa for two very important topics. First of all, we're starting from West Africa, where we're talking about the ongoing, if I want to put it that way, because the results have not been announced yet, ongoing election in Liberia. And after that, we're going to be looking at, well, it is the Mental Health Week. We're going to be talking about mental health, not just for anybody now. We're bringing it back home, and we're talking about journalists, the mental health for journalists. Okay.
Well, indeed. Now, talking about Liberia, the citizens have gone to the poll. They did go to the poll on the 10th of October to voting not just the president, also the House of Representatives and House of Senate. And the incumbent president has been having some backlash and criticism so far regarding his regime in power, and he's going against about 19 other persons, including Joseph Boakai, who was once a vice president, who has worked in aviation as well as finance. Also, the election was the first post-war presidential election, which saw about 2.4 million persons turning out to vote. While there have been reports about the election being marred by violence, some of the citizens described it as one of the most peaceful elections in the country's history. Observers are of the opinion that this was a referendum on the performance of the country's leadership in the past few years. Well, we're going to take a look at this report carefully packaged by our very own News Central's Omolola Ololade, and then we'll discuss it in the back end. Do take a look.
On October 10, 2023, Liberians went to the polls to elect a new president. The people were presented with the mandate of choosing who would lead them among the 20 candidates who ran the race for the presidential seat. These candidates include the current president, George Oweah, and Joseph Boakai, former vice president, under President Ellen Sirleaf, among others. Although there have been reports that the elections were marred by violence, some Liberians said the just concluded elections is one of the most remarkable elections in the country's history, as the people came out in their numbers to observe their civic responsibilities and in a peaceful manner too.
The election has been one of the remarkable elections because the people really came out in numbers yesterday. And I think the people are people of peace. So because we cannot repeat history, so it was so peaceful. It was peaceful. There was no interception or disruption. Everything went smoothly.
The turnout was very huge. As early as 10 o'clock in the morning, the place was already overcrowded. The place was overcrowded. I mean, they actually came out. They wanted to express themselves through the ballot. I mean, they had something to say, but then they could not say us except through the ballot paper.
I want to tell the international community that they should just keep eyes on us, and then they should be looking at the National Election Commission. She shouldn't panic, you know. They should be focused and give the election the result. Anybody that wins, we say accept it, they will be our president.
While there have been concerns by Liberians and international observers on the delay in the announcement of the election result, the National Electoral Commission urged everyone to be patient for the umpire to do its job effectively.
But when you have candidates come out to announce their own results, I think that is troubling. And this is why we say this should be considered as fake news. Only when the National Elections Commission announces a result can those results be the actual results. And this is what we are doing here today at the Tally Center, meaning that all of these results have been processed from the polling places where they were counted.
Like other countries, Liberia is facing its own unique challenges and issues. The country therefore needs a leader whose policies and programs will mirror the general wishes and aspirations of the masses.
And that is a report compiled by our very own Omolola Ololade, talking about Liberia's elections. Now, joining us to discuss the elections in Liberia is Ibrahim Al-Bakri Nyei. I hope I pronounced your name very well. Now, Ibrahim is a Liberian researcher, policy analyst, and columnist. Ibrahim, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Liberia. Okay, Ibrahim, if you can hear me, can you hear me?
Ibrahim, I think your device is muted. If you can help us unmute, please.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you so much, Ibrahim. And now straight to the business of the day. The elections voting has been concluded, but we are still awaiting the results of these elections. Now, from that report, we saw that Liberians are quite enthusiastic as to what the outcome of this voting and the election will be. How did this deeply contested, elections, how did this, change the nature of the recent Liberian, will I say, or basically, how did this election actually impact the overall political landscape of Liberia, if I put it that way?
Thank you very much. The elections were very competitive and the turnout was massive, but this is not the first time we've had huge turnout. We've always have increasing turnout in every election. In the last 2017 election, we had around 75% turnout. For this, we are expecting anything between 76 to 80% turnout because it was huge. Liberians demonstrated incredible level of patriotism. They came out to support their political parties peacefully. And now it's left with the National Election Commission to come out with the results to manage the expectation of the public and to help calm this situation of collective angst that has grabbed the nation.
Right. Now, Ibrahim, let's talk about the challenges that has made the election such an intense one where there's a high level of contention amongst the parties. What are the major challenges that Liberia is facing currently? We do understand that George Weah has not exactly performed up to par, according to the people. He's made some promises that he's not been able to live up to in the past years that he's been in power. But what are the major issues that is making this a very, very highly contended election?
Well, several factors. Number one, the economy. The economy has been on a decline. Poverty situation has deepened. About 50% of Liberians face multidimensional poverty as defined by the World Bank and UNDP. Multidimensional poverty means it's a situation in which people are poor from different dimensions, healthcare, education, water and sanitation, and lacking in basic necessities of life from multiple dimensions. And there is massive youth unemployment, and there's been a drug epidemic over the last few years. A very terrible situation of drug abuse among young people, and massive corruption in the government also. And so all this election is taking place in this context of a drug epidemic, corruption in public administration. And the thing about corruption in Liberia, which people must understand, is in this context, it's not just a corruption because of George Weah's government. It's also a situation of an entrenched degree of corruption in the public administration system, which is also enabled by a legislature that is incompetent and equally corrupt. And so it's an entire ecosystem of corruption in the political arena.
That's quite interesting. Now, while the results are being counted and the entire country and, of course, the continent of Africa is awaiting the results of these elections, how would the outcome of this election influence Liberia's domestic policies, depending on who wins, of course? Not just domestic policies, I beg your pardon, but also the international relations with other countries, considering the continuous nature of the electoral process?
Well, that depends on the manifesto and the program of the candidate that will win. We don't expect a significant radical change in terms of our international policies. Liberia has a liberal approach to international policy, and Liberia has been a member of the non-aligned movement, though a member of the non-aligned movement, but heavily now leaning towards the Western axis of international politics, influenced by the U.S. and very recently, there has been some Chinese influence, but that influence hasn't extended to Liberia's decision on the global stage. China's influence is more domestic in terms of Liberia's economic engagement, but on the international stage, Liberia is largely influenced by the Western axis and the US in particular. Domestically, all of the parties have almost similar policies. They have all pledged to fight corruption. They have all pledged to improve the economy. But for our democracy, what would this mean is that this is the major test for our political institutions. This is the first major elections being organized by Liberian institutions since the withdrawal of the UN. We've had 4 post-war elections, but this is the first one solely organized by Liberian institutions. So a successful outcome of this election will signify to the world that Liberian institutions are stable and prepared to lead the process of democratic change and organize elections by themselves, consolidate democracy.
All right, we also understand that this is the first time, and that's speaking about international policies and influence, that the country, Liberia, is conducting elections without international partnership, without international interference as much, although we know that there are still some international bodies that did monitor the elections. How would you rate the election generally without the extreme influence of international bodies this time around?
Well, first, as a matter of clarity, this is not the first time Liberia is conducting election without international organizations. But this is the first time since the end of the Civil War in 2003. We had elections here for over 100 years. Liberia is an old country, an old sovereign country that got independence in 1847. We had series of multi-party democratic elections all these years from 1847 until 1951. And then we had one-party rule until 1980, when we had a military coup. In 1985, we had multi-party election. But since the end of the Civil War, we've had 4 elections. This is the first among the 4 elections that the international community is supporting. But what we have seen, we've seen greater national ownership in the absence of the international community. We've seen a demonstration of Liberian agency and capability. And we've seen the organization of security forces and how the extent to which they are supporting this process without any influence, without any embedded international personnel. So this signifies and tell the rest of the world that Liberian agency is well capable and competent to deliver on its own on their own mandate. The institutions are capable to deliver on their own mandate. And again, the outcome of this process, we don't expect that all parties will accept the result. We know that in every democracy, there are institutions for redress, but when candidates believe in those institutions for redress and go to the court, that is an acceptance of the sovereignty and authority of the national institutions. And so if the candidates do not accept the outcome of this election, we expect them to go to court and that they will be recognizing the legitimacy and authority of the court over this process as part of the democratic institutions. And so there are so many countries around Africa where people go to court because they do not trust the Electoral Commission.
Finally, speaking about the Electoral Commission, who is supposed to be in charge of conducting everything that has to do with this election, were there any shortcomings, in your opinion, throughout this electoral process that you would think should have been improved upon in 2023? And what kind of suggestions or advice would you be giving the Electoral Commission going into the next elections?
Well, there will always be the need to improve the process after every electoral cycle. And some of the shortcomings were not necessarily shortcomings of the Election Commission, but they are all symptoms of limited capacity of the Liberian state itself. The challenges faced by the Election Commission, for instance, budgetary challenges, they weren't supported to the full budget requirements they needed to conduct this election. And so that is not the fault of the Commission. The Commission could not easily transport electoral materials in some parts of the country due to the inaccessibility of those areas as a result of poor and terrible road conditions. Those are not faults of the Election Commission. Those are problems of state capacity, which even the education services face, the health services do face, the postal services do face. So the challenges in delivering these elections that we are now experiencing with delay in the results, in announcing the results, are general challenges of state capacity, which we must recognize and should not think they are peculiar to the Election Commission. Well, maybe the Commission should have been more transparent and forthcoming with information, but again, they justified that they did not receive adequate budgetary requirements, adequate budgetary allotment to support some of the processes, including public engagement, that they had initially planned.
All right. Thank you so much for contributing your own, should I say, quota to this particular topic. And we do hope that at the end of the day, the best candidate will win and will rule Liberia. Thank you so much for joining us, Ibrahim.
We all hope for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, Blessings, it does seem like some of the challenges he spoke about are, will I say, challenges that almost every African country seems to face when it comes to election and electioneering, basically. Challenges of road accessibility, challenges of transportation. And again, like you said, not necessarily the challenges of the Electoral Commission, but state challenges, basically, that definitely affect everything, affect health, affect education, affects almost every sector of different African countries. Yeah, and I think still speaking of the challenges of the Electoral Commission, I think that one of the areas that needed to redo the elections, I think the ship or boats that was bringing their, what's it called now? The ballot papers capsized. But I think that one thing that I'm happy about Liberia election is the level of transparency, because I did get to ask some of the people over there, and they did say that they're following up on reconducting the elections, unlike some other African countries where it's happened, and they just, you know, forget that region as though they don't have the right to vote. Yeah, very true. Well, that's a good one for Liberia. We do hope that, like I mentioned, everything will go well and that the best candidates in this election would win. We'll go on a very quick break now. When we come back, we'll be talking about mental health. It is Mental Health Week, but we're not looking generally now. We're coming home, as I mentioned earlier. We're talking about mental health of journalists. Do stay with us.